cup of coffee, sit back and listen to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire and motivate you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change your attitude, change your life. Visit CYACYL.com.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. 85% of Americans have siblings, and at least one-third of adult siblings in America experience serious sibling strife. We convince ourselves that problems with our brothers and sisters will disappear because we no longer live under the same roof, and now we've limited contact, or in some cases, no contact at all. According to today's guest, Dr. Jeannie Safer, even if you haven't seen your brother or sister in decades, they accompany you in every aspect of your life. The problems with siblings can lead into a lifetime of grief and distress. Dr. Safer has been a psychotherapist for 38 years and is the author of The Normal One, Death Benefits Beyond Motherhood, and Forgiving and Not Forgiving. Her new book is entitled Cain's Legacy, Liberating Siblings from a Lifetime of Rage, Shame, Secrecy, and Regret. Dr. Safer appears frequently on television and radio and has written for The Oprah Magazine, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and More Magazine, among other publications. Welcome, Dr. Safer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Dr. Safer, the statistic that I read, that at least one-third of adult siblings in America experience serious sibling strife, for me that's an alarming statistic because we're raised that family is so important, that it's everything. And when you hear a statistic like that, it makes me wonder what exactly is going on in our society today. And in your book, Cain's Legacy, you wrote about your relationship with your brother. What was that relationship like, and what got you interested in this area of study?
Well, I think, by the way, that even though we think that families are supposed to be so important, that sibling strife is a big issue for many, many families. It's not all Hallmark perfect.
Yeah.
But in my own situation, certainly was not. I was the younger by 7 years, and my brother had difficulties socially and with school. This was before anybody was diagnosed with ADHD. And I was the one who achieved and all of that. And then he also became a diabetic later. And we really never got along. I have to say that I don't recall one really intimate moment or conversation that we ever had. And I never really thought much about it. It's interesting because we really shelved these relationships. You know, I didn't think he had that much effect on me. But then when I started thinking about it, and I realized that he had an enormous effect on me. And then as a result of that and writing that book, I became a specialist in psychotherapy with siblings who have problem siblings. And this book, Cain's Legacy, came out of that because I realized that you don't have to have a disabled sibling to have a difficult sibling. In fact, they could be quite functional when they're not with you. So this is an extension of that work, and my goodness, there's a lot of sibling strife out there.
Well, and in touching upon what you just mentioned, that they can be quite functional when they're away from you, I would imagine that causes us much grief as well because, we look at someone that we're supposed to love in theory. We grow up with this person. We're supposed to know more about this person than anyone else on the planet, and yet we see that person having a relationship with outsiders that we wish we could have with that person. So
that's right.
I would assume that this would do a lot of emotional damage to us on a very subconscious level.
Yes. It's a very painful situation, but it's also the reality in so many, many families.
Well, Dr. Safer,
we don't choose our children. We don't choose our siblings.
I was going to say, I wanted to just interrupt for one moment there, and I want our listeners to hone in on that because you mentioned it's not all a Hallmark card, and I think especially around the holiday time, when you're going through a tumultuous relationship, you think everyone else is the Cleaver family, and that's just not true. So I just wanted to point that out, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, I think that's an essential point because everybody, part of the subtitle is shame. We feel ashamed that we don't have good sibling relationships, that there's something wrong with us. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book is to illuminate for people that other people are in the same situation they are. And most people just don't know what to do about it. And there is always something to do about it, even though it may be simply understanding the situation rather than being able to change it. Because it takes two to reconcile, but it only takes you to understand what went on. And I agree with you. It's so sad not only to see a sibling functioning fine with other people, but to see other people's siblings, love them and be close to them when you've never experienced it.
And
it's such a loss.
You use words in your book to describe a sibling experience such as rivalry and jealousy, manipulation, resentment. These do not sound like the type of words that go along with a loving relationship. So what goes wrong? What causes us to be jealous of one another or manipulate each other and so forth?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I don't think any human relationship, probably including with yourself, is free of negative feelings. We're all made of love and hate. That's who we are. But these relationships, the hate and the negativity overwhelms the good feelings. The main source of it that I discovered as I was interviewing all the people that I talked to was parental favoritism. That is the biggest thing that sunders siblings from each other. Not rivalry, because rivalry is normal and universal. But when parents really pick out one child to be the golden one and the other to not matter, that really sets people up in a way that's very difficult to get over.
So it's
and
not...
also, look, there are personality differences too, but everyone knows siblings who have different personalities who are friends. So it's not just being different. It's very often one envies the other, resents that they have a better life or more money or more beautiful or whatever. That's a big thing.
Well, so we always hear so much about the birth order. You're saying that that's not necessarily what's important in these types of relationships. It's more how our parents relate to us?
Absolutely right. I'm so glad you made that point because I think birth order is the most overrated idea in terms of sibling relationships because the meaning of birth order depends on what it means to your parents. If your parent was the younger child, they're going to have feelings about the younger child. There's nothing objective about birth order positions. It really has to do with the experience of parents with their own siblings. And I can give you lots of examples, really amazing examples, of how the parents' feelings, unconscious feelings, really affected their siblings and made them enemies.
Before we get into what we can do about this, you mentioned something about a dysfunction spectrum in your book. How can we determine where our relationship lies on this dysfunction spectrum?
Well, I mentioned that there are I call it 6 degrees of separation in siblings, going from complete estrangement to what I call chinks in the armor. And you can read about what they are to give you an idea of where you stand. Some of them, let me just go through them for you. The worst is permanent total alienation. Then we get to obligatory meetings only. I call them wedding and funeral siblings who don't talk except when they're at a wedding or funeral. Going through the motions, that's a very popular one, where you have, you maybe exchange a birthday gift or an email, but nothing more. Then we have cool civility, in which people initiate contact, but they really don't want to talk to each other very much. There's no intimacy. And they, even though it may bother one or the other, they don't really work at changing it. And then number 5 is an interesting one. I call it rapprochement by proxy, and that is either your children get along with your siblings' children, or your spouse makes a bridge to the other. That's a possibility of getting together one step removed. And then the last one is the chinks in the armor, which is people who have had a lot of trouble with their sibling, but they see something changing or some possibility. One example of that was really very touching to me, because I knew both of the people, is my friend and his incredibly obnoxious brother were taking care of their aging parents. And the obnoxious brother stepped up to the plate, and he really participated, and it changed his brother's feeling towards him. It was one of the really positive things that I saw.
Well,
that
and I
people
think
can get better sometimes.
Well, I was going to say, I think what happens often is people miss those opportunities to mend relationships. When you go through health issues or death, that's the time that you really need to rally with one another. And I think that those are golden opportunities to fix relationships.
Yes, they are. And what I recommend that people do going into those situations is to be frank and direct with a sibling and to say things like, look, we've had our problems, but let's really try to work it out so that we can take care of mom and dad, or that, I want to help you through this hard time in your life or whatever. It can work, but it doesn't always work. And people need to know that it's good to make an effort, but there's no guarantees because, again, it takes two. Your sibling can be so entrenched that they're unwilling to take the hand that you offer them. But I do have some very touching examples of people who were reconciled on the deathbed.
We need to take a break at this point. When we return, I'm going to ask Dr. Safer some tangible steps that we can take to mend these relationships, or if we should even try to mend them at all. This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life now has a free monthly digital magazine that can be read online or emailed to your inbox. Each month, nationally recognized leaders in their field provide the information that you need to inspire and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Use the wisdom provided in the publication and apply it to your everyday life. Visit cyacyl.com for more information or to begin your free subscription. That's cyacyl.com. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is psychotherapist, author, and speaker Dr. Jeannie Safer. Dr. Safer's new book is entitled Cain's Legacy, Liberating Siblings from a Lifetime of Rage, Shame, Secrecy, and Regret. Dr. Safer, before break, I mentioned that I was going to ask you what we can do to help fix some of these relationships. And as a follow-up to that, I know sometimes you say that maybe we shouldn't even fix them, that they're just not worth salvaging. So let's get into the part about what we can do when we realize that it is a relationship that is fixable. What are some of the steps that we need to take to work on this relationship with our brother and sister?
Okay. Well, the first thing we have to do is to really think about our past and think about the other person. Once you've decided that you want to try, what I recommend is that you try to see your family and yourself through your sibling's eyes, because you'll find out that that person grew up in a different family than you did, even though you ate dinner together every night. And to see how they see you. Think about it before you talk to them. This is before you do a lot of the work first on yourself. And then some of the questions that I feel that are useful to ask when you're trying to understand a sibling is to say, who is this person independent of our relationship? Who is my brother or sister as a child, as a spouse, as a professional, as a friend? Who is this person in other experiences of their life? And somehow that can get you kind of out of being stuck looking right at them and being able to see them in the world more. And sometimes you see things that are very surprising. For instance, my brother, who I felt I couldn't get along with for 2 minutes, had some friends. He had a jazz band. He had relationships. And I started to think about how these were different from what was possible between us. So that's the first thing. The second thing I recommend is don't wait for your sibling to come to you. Take charge, take initiative, go to them, and say, you don't have to be in perfect harmony to do this. To say something like, look, we don't get along. I want to change that as we get older. We're no longer, living with our parents. Let's see if we can find a way to each other. And very often, the other person will respond to that. Not always, but very often they will. And the third step that I suggest, and by the way, this takes a lot of time to do. It's always good to talk about your parents, because very often, as I said, parents are implicated in this. So if you say, well, hey, how did you see Mom and Dad? Did you think I was favored? Did you think you were favored? Just to talk about these unmentionable things. And sometimes to say something like, and this is something I did say to my brother, I said, I was grossly favored over you, and it wasn't fair, and I didn't deserve it, and I'm sorry that it had such a terrible effect on our relationship, but let's see if we can mend it now. And he said, you really think so? And I said yes, and he couldn't do it. But I was so glad I was able to say that, because I got out of my own sense of entitlement by doing it. And the last step that I recommend to people is to realize that this is not something where you kiss and make up. It takes a long time to mend something that's really broken. And there's fits and starts. There are second and third chances. Don't give up if at first you don't succeed. Keep trying. And at some point you may find that the person really is just impossible, and then you stop. But if you're really working on it, it's not a smooth course.
Well, I was going to ask
I
Dr.
hope that's helppful.
Well, I was going to say, Dr. Safer, what happens when your brother or sister doesn't want to? How can you accept the fact that you're just not going to have this relationship?
Everything isn't fixable. I think we have a fantasy in our society that if we just try, we can make everything work, and it's not true. There are relationships that are so damaged or damaging that these people don't belong in our lives. And if the other person is unwilling or unable, what you need to do then is to grieve, because you can grieve for something that you never had. It's a kind of paradoxical notion, but I found myself, after my brother died, I grieved for the fact that I never really had a brother, and that he really never had a sister. And that when you're able to do that, you're able then to go on and have sisterhood and brotherhood in other ways psychologically with people in your life. If you don't do it, then you're kind of stuck much more than if you do. Grieving is essential.
Dr. Safer, what happens to the people who have let so much time go by that now the sibling has passed away and they no longer have that opportunity? How can they accept it and move on that they just never had the chance to fix it?
Well, here is really a hopeful message, because it happened to me. And that is that your brother and sister live within you. They're part of you because they're part of your history. And at any time, you can revisit and re-engage in that relationship. I learned more about my brother and my relationship with him, and I understood it more after he was dead. And this is open to anyone. There are steps in the book on how to do this, and I recommend it to anyone to work through their shame and regret over a relationship that couldn't be fixed. You can fix things inside. You could change your relationship to something that was unfixable in the world by changing it inside yourself.
And Dr. Safer, what would you say to people who are dragging their children into these relationships?
Oh, God.
How much damage does that do to the child?
Oh, it's a terrible thing. It's bringing it on to the next generation. If people would just say, I want it to stop here. I want the buck to stop here, but they want allies, very often because they feel guilty. If your child doesn't like the child of your brother or sister, then somehow that justifies that you don't. But I also saw some interesting examples where the children, when I was talking about rapprochement by proxy, where the children are the emissaries. One sibling couple that I spoke to, the woman was very moved because her sister, who she really had not gotten along with her whole life, had her son make a Valentine for my interviewee's son. So one son made a Valentine for the other, and it was really also a Valentine from the one sister to the other. And both of them knew it. And that was a way to use children in a good way.
The book is Cain's Legacy, Liberating Siblings from a Lifetime of Rage, Shame, Secrecy, and Regret by Dr. Jeannie Safer. Dr. Safer, where can our listeners go to get more information about you and your work?
Well, you can go to my website, which is Jeannie Safer, JeanneSaferPhD.com, about all my books on taboo topics, and particularly on Cain's Legacy. It's also available at local bookstores, at Barnes & Noble. It's available on Amazon. And I do hope that this shows people that there are other siblings in the same situation they are, and shows you a way out, either within yourself or with your sibling. You'll never regret reading it and thinking about it, I promise.
So for more information, you can visit JeannieSaferPhD.com. Or as always, you can visit our website, which is CYACYL.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, listen to past shows as podcasts, read the digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, and now take part in the CYACYL Book Club. Dr. Safer, in 30 seconds or less, what would you like our listeners to walk away with from this interview?
I want people to know that brothers and sisters accompany them through life, to not think that they're gone because they don't live together, to re-engage with these troubled relationships inside yourself, because that can make a difference both in the world and in your relationship to other people. That's what I want people to be able to do, to see that these people are part of us forever.
Dr. Safer, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think this is a very important topic. As I said in the beginning, for so many of us that have difficult relationships within our family, we tend to be envious of those that we perceive to have perfect families.
Yes.
And it's just not the reality of the world we live in. So I'm so glad that you were here to bring this to light, to just let us really feel better about ourselves and the situations in which we live.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I think people can really make changes in attitudes to change their lives. I really agree with your philosophy.
Well, thanks again for spending time with us. This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.